Hello and welcome back to Breaking Traditions in L&D with me, Dan. So today's episode is all about remote learning and training. Has there ever been a more relevant time to upskill your people? Of course, this is something we should always do, but right now it is so much more obvious. With the global pandemic we've experienced throughout 2020, businesses have had to adapt their ways of working. We're not able to freely travel to visit people face to face, and we're not having large groups travel to a central location either. This means we are remotely training our people. Now, this isn't new for some people, but it is very new for many. This year has highlighted the key focuses we, as L&D or training people, should be doing. I've found that focusing on the following few things really helps you adapt to any situation, so you're less likely to be caught off guard. The first main focus is resources. Do you have a resource that tells, demonstrates, or describes how to complete each and every activity a staff member has to complete? This is key. Before building all these smart workshops, webinars, meetings, and other things like that as well, we need to have the basics in first place. These resources are the foundations to your learning. Without them, your training will collapse when there is a storm going on out there. These resources should be kept short, to the point, and step by step. They are operational guides on how to do your job. The problem we face when reviewing older style training materials is that they are very long-winded, and the key point is dissolved amongst all the information on that sheet. The resource doesn't need to be pretty either. Just a simple how-to guide or video will do the trick, but please keep it to the point. Once you have all the resources you need, you can use them in your other training programs as they are tools that they are familiar with. Not sure where to start? Build a skills matrix. Have virtual meetings with your employees and their line managers to discuss what they do. Match it against your job descriptions. Usually this will highlight a need to update them, and discuss with the senior leaders in the business to make final decisions on who does what. The second key focus is online content. This doesn't mean having over 200 off-the-shelf courses to keep people busy. This means having a central point for all of your resources to be stored, usually on an LMS. This reduces the time that people search for a resource and ultimately reduces the risk of people going rogue and doing their own thing, potentially harming the business. Use your online platform wisely. Structure your learning on there. Use the resources in the business to help you build structured programs that take people through a journey. Your online platform is a visual representation of what is available to someone. Having a visual learning path can be hugely engaging to your staff. Put everything on there, every e-learning module, every webinar, and every course, in the order you'd expect someone to complete it for their development. For compliance learning, it is probably the opposite. These are the must-complete subjects rather than the ones that are to develop you. These courses are best to be structured in a way that they don't all show initially, but reveal as the previous one is completed. On most LMS platforms, you can time these to become available after a certain amount of time since the first course was registered, or you can set them up to unlock after they've completed the previous one. Having a list of 8 to 20 long compliance courses can be a real switch off. Let's not forget, this is usually a new starter's first engagement with your training offering. We don't want to overload them from the start and put them off. The third focus is face-to-face training. This is where the biggest changes happened. No longer are we able to do classroom training sessions with large groups. Now we're doing Zoom calls or heaping the pressure on management to facilitate. The first thing you need to do is think about the scale of the training you need to do now. There are going to be triple the amount of sessions that you need to complete, and you won't have the budget for triple the amount of people to facilitate that training. However, there is something you can do. Develop your managers to facilitate training. Have specialists in your area that can do certain subjects. Think about your Train the Trainer course. Do they need to know 100 theories about learning styles and self-awareness? Not really, not at this point. Right now, we need them to be able to train people. Learning styles are fluffy. As long as they know that all people learn in different ways and they should adapt to the learner, that's all that matters right now. Let's not forget, they already know most, if not all of the people they'll be training anyway. So focus on the training techniques they'll need to be able to use. Things like preparing the session, group involvement, reflection times, setting up activities, letting learners lead the session, and don't be the only voice in the room. Any group learning you'll be facilitating, as well as some key managers in your business, will be via video conference, Zoom, Teams, Skype, etc. This takes a slightly different skill set, and as now you'll need to keep the group engaged when you can't see them all. A fourth key focus is training on Zoom or other video conferencing software. So there needn't be too much difference between training on Zoom and training face-to-face. If you focus on the same philosophies, there should be no trouble. When training face-to-face, you get the physical contact. This is the only thing you can't really replicate. But with the way Zoom and other video conferencing apps are developing and innovating, it won't be long before you can fist bump someone through your screen. Here's a few tips for training on Zoom. The first tip is, as a facilitator, sign in with 2 devices or use 2 screens. Why? This allows you to use one device or screen to share your screen and facilitate, and another to show all delegates showing on your screen so that you can see the body language and whether people need help. It also helps you not forget anyone in the group when you're interacting. Tip 2 is mute all delegates. This may seem dramatic, but actually there's nothing worse than hearing background noise from 7 or 8 different locations distracting everyone. You can mute all as a facilitator and unmute them individually. Demonstrate how to use the reactions function for them to put their hand up if they have a question, use the chat function, or get them to wave at the screen if they don't get it. It gives you total control over the room to keep it flowing smoothly. Tip 3, don't forget that this is for the delegates. It's very easy to slip into instructor mode on Zoom, talking all the way through, simply giving information. If this is what your training session is like, then maybe it should be a recorded video or info sheet. This session needs to be interactive, involving the delegates as much as possible. Tip 4, break your session into smaller sessions. It may sound obvious to those experienced folk out there, but you don't want to have really long periods talking about the same thing. On Zoom, sometimes it's better to keep it short and sweet. Follow up with a resource with full detail. Think about how you are structuring your sessions. I like to split them all into 3 sections: intro, activity, reflect. So a 5-minute intro where you introduce the subject, little theory or background around the subject and why we are doing this session. Activity, this should take up most of the time in your training session. Get the delegates to complete an activity in the session. Make sure it's relevant, use scenarios, not just random scenarios, but scenarios that have actually happened in the business that haven't necessarily been handled correctly in the past. This is usually the reason we have the session, right? So use tools that are already available in the business. This will help them be able to use them back in the workplace. And reflect. This time is vital. Everyone takes on information differently. This allows the time for people to absorb what they have done just now. Personally, I'd give 5 minutes Q&A, note-taking time, then follow it up with an interactive quiz to check knowledge retention, using that data to follow up the session with people that may have struggled with that point. Tip 5, regular breaks. Is that regular breaks on Zoom? Yes, breaks on Zoom. When designing your Zoom training, think about the experience. Just because people are sat down on video doesn't mean they can handle hours of information. In fact, they'll probably need more frequent breaks. Don't let a single session go over an hour without a break. It's really important for their focus. They'll be staring at a 15-inch screen for the entire time, probably in not the most comfortable seat either. Do you really want to be responsible for the people having headaches and not being able to focus on the rest of the session? Ideally, aim for a break every 45 minutes for a 10 to 15-minute break. You should really have planned your sessions into 45-minute intervals, which will help with those timings as well. My 6th tip is get people on their feet. Try and create activities that involve people getting out of their seats. Sitting down for too long will become uncomfortable. There will be people that would choose to work during these breaks. You can't stop that, as you probably won't be aware of it. So you have activities where people need to stand up and get active will really help keep the focus of people. My 7th tip is explore the features your video conferencing software has. I speak about Zoom a lot. That is what I use most frequently. You can now use breakout rooms in Zoom. This is a great feature. You can separate your delegates into groups to workshop together and set specific tasks. This is particularly good for role play where they will be in a safe place without the whole group listening to them. It makes it more comfortable and less nerve-wracking for the shyer people in the group. You can dip in and out of each room as you please to check on progress. You can also send group messages across all of them as well and bring them all back into the room at the same time with one click. It's really quite useful. It really adds that realism to it and try and keep it as similar to face-to-face as possible. My 8th tip is PowerPoint. Yes, PowerPoint is the go-to app for many people. I don't think that you necessarily need PowerPoint for everything, but in Zoom, actually, it's really helpful. So if you're using 2 screens, you're able to use it as like a whiteboard rather than as a presentation. So I don't often use it in presentation mode. I'll just have the title and a bit of branding, but use it as a whiteboard. So this helps with interaction and noting down ideas. It also doubles as a great follow-up to the session. You can send out the completed presentation as a PDF to the delegates and their managers as a resource to recap the session in the future. When I do use it in presentation mode, though, it's usually because I've gamified the session and it requires certain animations or sounds for the experience to work. So yeah, it's really quite good to use it as a whiteboard. And it really helps with the group activities as well, so they can see their ideas coming up on the screen. My 9th tip is follow it up. End your training session with something you want them to work on, a project or activity where they'll need to physically put their knowledge into practice. It is vital that you or someone follows this up. If it's not followed up, the natural thing to happen is people forget. Following it up keeps learning live and performance improving. Let's not forget, you're not able to go and see them face to face in the flesh. So following it up is really even more important, because people will be less likely to complete it if they think that nobody's going to check up on what they're doing. And it's not necessarily to check up on them, it's just to check their progress and make sure that they're coping with that okay. That's all my tips for Zoom training. I suppose my last key focus after using Zoom is well-being. Well-being is absolutely huge right now. People are struggling. It's been a tough year. Your business or company are probably trying to do well-being events but not getting much take-up. This is where training can support with well-being. We can create a short piece of bite-sized learning that ties into the well-being event that is happening. This bite-sized learning is to provide the why for the activity. Well-being can be hugely impactful to your staff's mindset. If their well-being is being looked after well, they're going to be more engaged and willing to take on more knowledge or new skills. I think this gets overlooked sometimes. How many companies can truly say they put their teams first? A lot of companies say they put their customer first, but in order to put your customer first, you need to put your teams first. If you don't look after your staff, how can you expect them to look after your customers? Happy team, happy customers. Now, training don't necessarily create the well-being in the business, but training in L&D can 100% support that well-being. And it's such an important thing right now that I think that everybody should be pulling together and doing what they can to look after the people. Thanks for listening, folks. Take care and keep breaking those L&D traditions.